All right.
Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. We honor creators, and today we have on Coffee with Kish. We have Kishkuman. Welcome to the show. That's right, show our mugs. There you go.
Mm.
As good as ever.
Well, thank
right?
you. Yeah. Thank you for the welcome. It's great to
Yeah.
be here. Thank you for having me on.
And thanks, Debbie, for co-hosting today.
Absolutely.
And so
Ta-da!
we like to start out by asking, about your younger years, the founding layers of Kishkuman. What was it?
Yeah.
Where'd you grow up, and what was it like being Kishkuman as a 12-year-old? No, I'm just kidding.
I was born in Provo, Utah, an exotic place. And my parents were students at Brigham Young University. I had my first birthday on the road to Northern Virginia because my father, after getting a PhD in physics, took a job with the CIA because his NASA dreams were spoiled by President Nixon cutting the funding to NASA. He'd been on a NASA fellowship. At the end of his PhD, they called him on the phone and they said, "Sorry, we don't have a job for you after all." His dream had been to be an astronaut, and his dreams were crushed by President Nixon. A lot of people's dreams were crushed by Richard Nixon, and my dad, I guess, was one of them. But yeah, so I grew up in Northern Virginia. The DC area is a big hub for Latter-day Saints, the DC Temple. I'd love driving around the Beltway with my family, riding in the back of the car as a kid and seeing that giant Wizard of Oz looking temple. They actually had to have the church lower the lights because it was causing accidents on the Beltway. And I grew up in a little tiny branch in Northern Virginia out in the countryside because my dad was commuting many miles down into Alexandria. He wasn't actually at the Langley headquarters, but at some other unspecified office. And if I called him on the phone at work, as sometimes I needed to do, the receptionists were pretending that his was a dentist's office or something, that I called the office of a dentist. Because, when you're in the CIA, you're not answering the phone saying, "Hello, CIA, can we help you?" But when we first moved out to the country, it was in Loudoun County, which is the northernmost county of Virginia. My family went inactive for a short period of time, and they were tracked down by people starting up a branch locally. And so I grew up in this small branch in Northern Virginia. And interesting that despite the fact that it was really small, it was often peopled with employees of the FBI, CIA, and other government agencies, workers who were going downtown. But I think one of the things that fascinates me about my reflections on this story is that, for a while my parents weren't active, and they
And
had
you were aware
really
of it.
no intention. Yeah, I
You
was
were
aware
like
of it.
7.
Wow, that's very good. Yeah, I was 6 years old when we moved, and
So you would have been like,
yeah.
"Gee, why aren't we going to church?" But hey, I really like watching TV instead of going to church.
Can we tune into Star Trek, Wide World of Disney, or Animal, whatever? Yeah, I don't think that I was really aware. I don't think I was very religiously attuned as a kid,
Okay, so
honestly.
you just look back at it as you knew it was going on, but it wasn't that big of a deal. You didn't
I didn't
miss
really think anything of it. Yeah.
you didn't miss scribbling color all over a picture of a temple and having your mom put it on the refrigerator.
Well, yeah. Well, as a kid, I think I had a lot of social anxiety. I didn't really know what it was at the time, but I found primary to be kind of traumatizing as a little kid.
Oh.
And how I would respond to this is I would just shut down. I would just become very quiet and non-responsive and sort of cut myself off from other people if I got overwhelmed by uncomfortable social situations. And I
Did you get
definitely at
teased
the
for
time
that?
found, pardon me?
Would you get teased for that? Were
I
you like
think
the weird
everybody
kid
just,
that doesn't say anything?
yeah, yeah. I think people thought I was kind of weird and sad. at church, and that actually really kind of remained the case through most of my years growing up in the church. Was that I was usually on the fringe of the social scene in the ward among the kids.
Right.
I wasn't one of the popular kids ever.
You had to be really encouraged to go to a dance or something.
Yeah, and when I got there, I just, I was one of the
Wallflower.
wallflowers.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I liked
And so
listening to the music, but
how old
yeah.
were you when your parents got reactivated? Was it just a short time or were you
Yeah, it was
like
just a short time. It was like 6 months we were out there and they tracked us down and, but my parents had you know, they had a troubled marriage, I would say.
right?
And
It-
so by the time I was 8, they separated for the first time. And that was hugely traumatic because then we became a branch project, where,
Right.
oh, look at the poor
Love bombed.
children, their parents are split up. And that could be embarrassing too, right? To get that kind of attention as being the sad, poor waifs who are experiencing this unacceptable social situation that the church preaches against on a regular basis. But yeah, so
So
my parents were separated.
one parent moved out.
Yeah, no, my father moved out. It was only for about a year the first time. They got separated the second time when I was in high school, and that's the one that stuck. Although they didn't get divorced until I was like 6 months into my mission.
Oh, yeah.
It was quite a ride there with the family, and that kind of, I
They
think, it interfered with my social and intellectual development because I
they
was
were holding
mostly
hope.
worried about my stressful life.
They were holding hope to the very end and until it was
No,
irreconcilable.
much more mercenary than that. Actually, they were waiting for the right time to sell the house.
And it was at the
Uh,
same house in the same branch, sort of?
yeah, we lived there from the time I was 6.5 to I lived there. I left on my mission from that same home in Northern Virginia. It was a very old house built in the early 19th century, and it was part of what had been maybe part of the land of a large plantation of the Carter family, a very
So did you ever think
prominent.
about that slaves could have lived nearby?
Yeah, yeah. No, my, so my school district as a kid, it was one of the last places to integrate. And I don't think the schools were fully integrated until the 1970s, some way into the 1970s. The high school mascot was the Raiders, and these were actually a reference to Confederate irregulars who fought the Union in my county. And you drive up the dirt roads and you'd see these little houses that had obviously been slave quarters. So, you know, yeah, the county seat is Leesburg.
Right. So it was like, was there a Robert E. Lee Boulevard in your town?
I can't remember. There must have been. I mean, it was just surprising to me the degree to which they were clinging to that past. That
There was
you
lots
know,
of
it,
echoes.
yeah, lots of echoes of that past, and it was a place where you would often see people brandishing, or they'd have flags, Confederate flags, in the back of their truck, and that was the kind of place. And it was a funny mix because on the one hand you had all of these people who had just moved to this place because they were trying to find an affordable place to commute to DC from. That's what our family did. But then the locals, oh my goodness, it was a whole other culture down there. And lots of delightful people, honestly. I don't regret growing up in this place. It was a fascinating place to grow up, and I think it's partly the reason why I became a historian, because I was surrounded by history, and I was absolutely fascinated by Civil War history, colonial history, you're in the middle of it when you're living
Right.
in Northern
Did they
Virginia.
have what do you call them, the recreations, where they have the North versus the South do battles?
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
Appomattox very far from where you were?
God, I'm terrible. This is going to sound really sad. I'm terrible with geography.
Okay, but I have been to
I don't
Appomattox.
recall going to Appomattox. We always went to Bull Run, which is just down the road.
The Battle of
So I
Bull
grew up
Run.
about 30 miles from Bull Run.
Okay.
And, we would go on the tours of the battlefield with the little cassette playing that would tell you, here's how the battle unfolded. And I just loved, I absolutely adored visiting those battlefields.
And did your
Um,
family take advantage of being in DC? Did you go to the Smithsonian
all
every
the
now and then?
time,
Yeah.
all the time. No, and so when I grew up, I wanted to, as a child, I wanted to be a scientist, to be like my dad, because he got his PhD in physics, and so my dream was to become a scientist. And I mostly read science books, but I also liked history, and the Smithsonian was just a regular stop. Every year we went a couple of times, it seems. And museums, I could stay. A museum to me is like a temple. You know, in some ways, it's what a temple should be. And of course, the Museon was a temple of the muses in antiquity. And the museum exhibits are almost like the offerings to the gods that were left, the votive offerings. So yeah, I'm obviously kind of too into this in a way.
No, you're lucky. Those museums, especially the Smithsonian, is amazing, and it's free. So that's the
Yeah,
best part, is you can go as much as you want.
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
beautiful
And
experience.
I got into ancient history because I was fascinated by the founding fathers, and as a kid, you have a very uncomplicated sort of Disney history version of them in your mind. And so I thought, well, Thomas Jefferson could read Latin and Greek, so that's
You
a
might as
thing to
well.
do.
Yeah.
Um, but my parents wouldn't let me take Latin. They said, what are you going to use that for?
It's a dead
So I ended
language.
up in French, took French. And you can see how far that got me. I can't even pronounce French very well today, much to the
You
laughter of my kids.
did French ever help you get more socially involved? Did you ever like start speaking French to women and they swooned over you?
There was no swooning. There's no very little swooning, as far as I was a very awkward, socially awkward, shy kid, and no, there was humor. I French class for me was a place to act out, because what I became was one of those introverts who is also at the same time a kind of a performer. So like most of the time I'm very awkward, but then I would get into certain situations and I would act out and become more of a performance artist. And that started in elementary school, where I was cutting up in class, distracting other students, and getting into, you know,
Like class clown?
yeah, a little bit of a class clown. I did love to make girls laugh. That was my way of getting their attention. If I liked a girl, I wanted to make her laugh.
Yeah, I was only going
So
to marry a girl that would laugh at my jokes. If they didn't laugh, we're out.
I had a similar strategy, and it really cut down the number of girls that were interested.
Very effective, though. Very effective. Women
Yeah.
do like to laugh at men's jokes. So kudos.
So your family was having problems, but you decided to go on a mission, I bet.
Well, it was really interesting. I mean, at least it's interesting to me to think about today, but I was 19, and I I didn't have much direction in life. I didn't really prepare to go to college. I barely graduated from high school, not because my grades were so terrible or anything like that, but because, for example, when I say that, what I mean is I didn't even really sign up for renting robes for graduation. I didn't really have any plans to walk, and it all came together at the last minute. And I was a super mediocre student in high school because I was too,
In your head.
too psychologically tied up in knots and having problems. So I didn't plan to go to college. A lot of
Did
my
you have a hard
friends
time doing the assignments?
I probably have undiagnosed ADHD, honestly.
So there's that. So when I was doing history, I was Paul Revere when I would read my American history books, right? That's how
Nice.
I put myself in the place of wherever I was reading. But for the life of me, I couldn't do the homework. So I would get A's on my tests and zeros for homework, and I would be a C student.
Yep. Yep.
I was the smartest C student in history.
Yeah. I mean, that's familiar to me. That sounds a little bit like me. I would have a terrible time being consistent in my schoolwork and doing assignments and paying attention. But every once in a while, I would just lift up my head, look up on the board, raise my hand, and say something that was absolutely dead on correct. And the teacher would just look at me with this
Like, how the hell do
extreme
you
look
know
of
that?
puzzlement. Like, yeah. And so I actually got some after class lectures where the teacher was saying, if you would just try and kind of do your work and so
Apply
forth,
yourself.
then yeah. So yeah, I was just kind of aimless, and my mom came up to me and she said, "Okay, you got to do something with your life." It was this speech, you got to move out, you got to do something. You can't just hang around my house forever. She said, you can go to college, you can get a job, or you can serve a mission. And for some reason, I thought to myself, even though I'd had no plans, even though I was really semi inactive, like I wasn't going to church every Sunday or anything like that. I just thought to myself, well, I want to figure out whether Mormonism is true. And
You're
so
going to test it.
I was going to test it. Moroni's Promise. It's a classic Moroni's Promise situation where I picked up a Book of Mormon, read the Book of Mormon, prayed and fasted about it, and I actually had like the classic conversion where I was, yes, the Spirit has told me that the church is true, and by golly, I'm going on a mission.
In the Book of Mormon you read, was it blue with the golden angel Moroni on the cover?
Yep, exactly. That was the one. Yeah, I loved those. They were kind of tacky looking, but in a great 1970s-ish kind of
with the
way. I like the
Freebird
vibe.
paintings in them.
I liked the ones that looked like gold plates. Did you ever have that where it had a gold cover with little
I saw
phony
that too,
characters? Yeah. I love those. That was my favorite. Now. Oh, I bet it is. If you have a pristine one in pristine condition, that's got to be worth something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where did your mission call send you?
California.
So you were thinking France? You were thinking France, and they sent you to California.
Yeah, well, because here's the thing. Unfortunately, I was honest when I filled out my missionary papers, because I think it would have seemed kind of counterintuitive to me to lie on my missionary papers. But I told them my actual grades in high school French, which was the place that I really used to torture the teacher more than learn French. And so I think they took me seriously when I said I had C's in French and decided not to send me on a foreign language speaking mission.
So did you go to Southern California?
Yep, Southern California.
See, they could have at
I was
least
in the
sent you
same
to
mission as Carrie
Napa and
Mulestein.
Sonoma.
Pardon me?
And they could have sent you to Napa County where, the grapes, they could have teased you with the wine country. Like, even though you don't get to go to France, here's the teaser. You get to go to see where California wine is grown.
Yeah, that wouldn't have had any impact on me. as sketchy as my activity was, and most of my problems were, like many young people, getting too friendly with my girlfriend. Those were the temptations of my youth, not doing drugs or drinking or anything like that. So being in wine country wouldn't have bothered me one bit. But no, I was in the same mission as Carrie Muhlestein, the BYU professor and apologist for the Book of Abraham. At the time, neither of us had any clue of what our eventual trajectories would be. At least I'm not aware that he knew what his final destination would be. But
so the missionary, he wasn't a powerhouse. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't strike me as a powerhouse, but actually that would have meant that I wasn't annoyed with him because I really found, the sort of overbearing leadership missionaries to be some of the worst and hardest people to deal with. I didn't like the complete slackers, and I didn't like the hard-nosed, super obedient martinets who were kind of do this, do that, wake up at this time, and but it brings that out. I think the mission field can really bring that out in people. Unfortunately, I was somewhere in between.
Yeah. Was California, was that a big conversion area during that period? Was there success in that mission as far as conversion rates?
Yeah, I mean, for me it was very uneven, but I have to say that my work patterns were also very uneven. And there was one month where my companion and I baptized 12 people, which was a huge deal. But the numbers are kind of deceiving or deceptive in that a lot of that came from one large family, and some of the others were actually their friends that they got to join the church. So it wasn't that I was a super missionary so much as there were times in my mission that we kind of lucked out, I would say. But it was a pretty productive mission, and a lot of people were baptized. And I really I loved California. California is perfect for me. If I could move to California today, I would, just because it suits my personality, I think. I just love the variety in everything, in geography, in climate, in people, and culture. I think California is the best. So sorry for people who don't like California.
So you're probably jealous that I live in the San Francisco Bay Area then, even though
I am, actually. I am. I mean, San Francisco, in terms of American culture, is one of the most important cities in North America. And I'd love to go to the places that one of my favorite authors, Philip K. Dick, lived in that area. And, I would love to go see and be at the places that Philip K. Dick was. I don't know his biography that well, but I know he lived in that area, and I love his novels, so I would love to see more. I've only been to San Francisco a couple of times, honestly. My mother's family came from Orange County, and so that was one of the disappointments of getting called to a mission in California. Is like, what? This is where my family's from. This isn't exotic. Yeah, been there. Yeah, in fact, I had helped my uncle when I was 18. I went to the mountains to help build my uncle's house. And when I returned on my mission, my uncle's house was in my mission. So there was nothing exotic about it at all. If it weren't for the fact that I absolutely love California, that might have been kind of miserable for me, but I do love California.
Well, my son-in-law went to France, and he had 2 baptisms, and he said, and a year later, they're both out of the church. So.
Yeah, I had some leave the church. Some not long after I baptized them, in fact, and that was somewhat traumatic. But it was, in one case, it was a young man, I think, who was leaned on by his girlfriend's father, like, if you want to be with my daughter, you have to join this church. And so
Religion.
he felt pressure to do that, and it didn't work out well. Go figure.
That's right.
It never does.
Yeah. It's not a good idea. It's not a good idea.
So I'm guessing you developed good habits, and did you apply for BYU your last few months of your mission?
I didn't. I am such a weird kind of late bloomer, and I think it'd be fair to say that. I mean, some people on my favorite discussion board might, and that I'm. Oops.
I sorry, I did something. My finger clicked a button on your
Did I
favorite
say something
discussion board.
offensive? Is there an automatic cursing block or something?
Right.
No, but I educationally I was kind of behind. I credit my mission with teaching me how to read. And I know that sounds funny because, like, wait, you graduated from high school, you didn't know how to read. I knew how to read, but I didn't really start digging into understanding what I was reading on a deeper level. But I really felt a sense of purpose to understand the scriptures and understand, how LDS doctrine is informed by the scriptures. And in Southern California, I was constantly getting into arguments with anti-Mormons or missionaries and teachers of, and even pastors of competing faiths. And I pride myself on having been fairly good at it, but that taught me a lot about how to read carefully, interpret texts, and argue through a text. That really changed my life. Even after my mission, I wasn't focused enough to apply to BYU. I first went back to the community college that I had kind of tepidly enrolled in before my mission, and returned to that. And at first I applied to BYU Idaho, but then suddenly this light went off in my head. Wait a second, my mission president really liked me. And that was odd, but my mission president had really liked me. I made him laugh, I made his wife laugh, and one of the things that occurred during my mission, which was pretty formative, was that kind of against the rules, I like to go to bookstores and libraries, maybe a little bit more than the average missionary, and pick up books to read that weren't on the approved list. And one that I found was Emanuel Swedenborg's Heaven and Its Wonders and Hell.
Wow.
And I started reading the introduction to this book. And it was talking about how people had been expecting a restoration of the pure primitive gospel of Christ. And I thought, what? what is this? Who is this?
And that could have been
Emmanuel
from like
Swedenborg?
1758. He was writing that. That's my guess.
Yeah. So, this is, for me, I thought this was exciting and positive because I thought, well, here it is. It wasn't just Joseph Smith coming out of nowhere with the claim that he was restoring the gospel, but many Christians had been yearning for such a restoration. And here we have a fellow who's receiving revelations, and who, even if you looked at how he was described when he was receiving his revelations, it matches descriptions of Joseph Smith's sort of revelation mode when others were observing him receiving a revelation. So I thought this was very affirming, but my mission president was kind of worried about me. And he said, well, my wife would like to read this book, so if you could come bring it to her. And so, I delivered the book to the wife of the mission president. She read the book. Then we had a conversation about it later. And I said, yeah, isn't this fantastic? And I could see that she was really trying to figure this out. Like, why did I think this was a positive thing? I think she expected it to be a challenge to my testimony when I hadn't thought about it in that way at all. So he was a very enthusiastic promoter of my application to BYU because he thought, this kid isn't so dumb here. He's got some smarts. I'll happily write a letter of recommendation for him. So I got into BYU Provo, and that's where I ended up for my undergrad.
And how'd you pick the major?
At first, I was a history major. Big surprise. Love of history for a long time, and a minor in pre-med because I had some idea that I would become a doctor, but I quickly discovered that I didn't like other pre-med students at all.
That is hilarious. It's the students that put you off medicine, not medicine.
Yeah, it really is, in fact, because
you weren't squeamish about the cadavers. You were squeamish about the live people around them.
Yeah. Well, I actually had kind of a friend, that I'd made as a pre-med student, and I was started taking the courses, and I was doing fairly well in them. But I think what the disconnect was that when I got to finally in the university, I was in a mode of intellectual discovery. And they were, I got to get good grades in these classes to get into med school. And so for them, it was very mercenary. For me, it's like, oh, isn't this all so fascinating? And now the reason I had actually gone to BYU, which I didn't talk about, was because I wanted to study with Hugh Nibley.
Wow.
That was the
Yeah.
real reason why I went, because I read my first Nibley book as an 18-year-old. My dad had since Cumorah on the shelf, and I just picked it up and read the whole thing. And on the mission, I illicitly or against the rules, started buying Nibley books. I've got a first edition of Abraham in Egypt that I got at the LDS bookstore by the mission office. When I got home from my mission, I had a dream, and it was a very vivid dream that I walked by my mother on this sunny morning. She was in the kitchen washing dishes, and she said to me, "Honey, you got a phone call." And I said, "Well, okay, who called?" And she said, "Hugh Nibley called." And I said, "What?" I said, "Well, when did he call?" And she said, in this bright voice, joyous voice, she's like, "He called 2 years ago." Really weird dream. But at the time, I just thought, this is a sign. This is a sign. I need to go to BYU and study with Hugh Nibley. And really, that was the track I was on. I took a couple of courses from Nibley, loved them.
And what department was that?
Well, he was in this funny program. It was almost like his own little institute. It was called the Ancient Studies. It was called Ancient Studies. And it was really, here's Hugh Nibley's office and secretary attached to a non-circulating library of books on antiquity. So I approached him one day and I said, "Dr. Nibley, I just love your work. If I wanted to do what you do, what should I study?" And he said, "Well, you have to study Greek and Latin." And that was it. That was the decision. So I majored in classics at BYU. There was a great classics program. There's still a great classics program at BYU. Wonderful faculty. And I stayed at BYU through an MA in Comp Lit. Again, the Comp Lit people are fantastic. Anything that's gone wrong in the church's eyes concerning Kish, the church should not blame on these wonderful programs. They didn't corrupt me. I just want that to be very clear. If anyone's frowning and their brow is furrowing and say, "What did these people do wrong?" They didn't do anything wrong. They certainly did launch me into my PhD program. And
Hey, Kish,
that.
I'm thinking of something right now.
Yeah.
You sort of studied people, right? You mentioned that you didn't like the people in the pre-med, right?
Yeah.
And that led to your downfall eventually, because you didn't like the way the defenders of the faith were behaving. They were bad actors. And that's what led you out, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's almost a congenital fault that I have. My parents and to a certain extent, even some of my grandparents didn't really put up with BS very well. They had a very strong BS detector and hypocrisy detectors, and they also had a very independent cast of mind. So one of the more formative experiences I had as a kid with regards to church authority was my parents being called in by stake leaders because they opposed a proposed stake split. Evidently, there was some general authority that had prophesied a stake split, and the local leaders wanted to make that happen. So they were going to make us drive 2 hours or more to get to stake conference so that they could say that this prophecy had been fulfilled. And my parents were like, we don't want to drive 2 hours to stake conference. We don't care who had a prophecy,
That can't be inspired.
Well, I mean, I just think they had the misapprehension, which I labored under for a long time, that when the church gives you an opportunity to vote on something that's real, it's really more of an opportunity to express your allegiance to the powers that be, not
Right.
a vote. But I think my parents had the false idea that this was a kind of vote, and so they voted against it, and they were pulled aside, and the stake leaders were like, are you apostatizing? And they were blown away. What are you talking about? We don't want to drive 2 hours to go to a conference. We don't. Apostatizing? That's absurd. But you see, that's that extra level of nonsense that you find way too often in your life as an LDS person. And I think, really honestly, like for me, when it came to the point where I found that LDS leaders were pressing members to call to campaign against Prop 8 in California to fight gay marriage, I was sickened. I was appalled. I couldn't believe it. I just thought, this is the most disgusting, hypocritical thing I can possibly imagine. I have seen pictures of my great-great-grandfather in prison garb with church leaders for practicing polygamy. And these guys are fighting to keep gay people from marrying?
Yeah, somebody else's weird matrimonial practice.
Just get out of here. And that, to me, that was it.
And on top of that, it's the we stay out of politics all our lives, right?
Well, I mean, I understand to a certain extent that they may have interest in certain social issues. Like, I may not always agree with them, but if it's like, well, we don't want gambling or something, okay, whatever. But gay marriage is such a profound social question. And we're talking about the happiness, health, and well-being of the lives of thousands of people, millions on this planet. And you have this organization that has decided that they're going to throw the might of their financial empire and the resources of their membership into denying these people the right to be happy, the right to live their lives openly as they are, who they are.
Yeah.
And I
even not in just this life, but in the next life, because as a widow, if you are not legally married, you don't get inheritance rights. You don't get those certain protections that you would get in a marriage. So it on the whole spectrum of protecting people, just in a humane way, the fact that the church did do that, and from the seat of Utah and fearing their political views, moral views on another state was, I agree, absolutely shocking.
Oh no, and I believe very firmly, as I am a student of history, and I know this is the rub. People interpret history in different ways, but I believe very firmly in a secular republic that allows freedom of religion. And
freedom of
the
religion
idea
also means
that
freedom.
certain religious groups will fight to impose their beliefs on all of us, that's something I have no tolerance for. Absolutely no tolerance for.
Freedom of religion also includes freedom from religion.
Yeah, I shouldn't have to live according to the values of or the particular beliefs of this other sect. And what I don't understand is the short-sightedness that doesn't see that as soon as you've enabled that kind of tyranny, that it can be turned against you, right? So maybe someone's going to decide in the future that, oh, something that LDS people are doing is not not godly and will bring down the judgments of God upon the nation and so forth. So, let's say they make temple ordinances illegal. I mean, it's a far-fetched idea, but I think the principle is that once you start imposing your beliefs on others and you make that acceptable, you have to accept the fact at the same time, but I don't think people necessarily do. It seems to me they're short-sighted that in the future someone may impose their views on you, and in a very active way, right? If you don't like, and I know it's trite at this point, and it's probably said a million times on Mormon themed shows on YouTube, etc. But if you don't like gay marriage, don't get gay married. If you don't believe in abortion, don't get an abortion. That doesn't mean you get to tell everybody else that they can't do those things. And that's where I draw the line, and I stand by that kaboom. That's it. And I've seen, since the election, a lot of traumatized students, especially our trans students. I had one of my trans students in here talking to me this morning, and I don't think it's like just the election or anything, but there's a lot of pressure on young people in general these days. And then you add to this the really hostile social and political environment regarding trans people to that mix. And it can be really debilitating and threaten their future and even their lives. And I think there's a horrible callousness to the kind of individual who takes no thought for the happiness and well-being of others when they say, you have to do this, you can't do this, we're going to impose on you these particular views, and really being nasty in a way that's designed, I think, to inflict harm, suffering, and certainly social marginalization. And I think that
psychological warfare.
it is. It is psychological warfare, and the right-wing extremists of this country have been engaged in psychological warfare against the rest of us for some time.
Yeah, absolutely. I will agree with that. That's unfortunate. I hope people learn to be kinder, regardless of politics or religion. I think we just all need to be nice again,
Yeah.
Stop swaying so far. Like, get off the pendulum. We hate this. We love this. We hate this. We love this. Like, just
yeah.
It's seeing
well,
the
I
hypocrisy.
think it's odd. What? Sorry.
Seeing the hypocrisy helps free your mind to then go forward and judge apologists' hypocrisy, and that becomes the making of Kishkumen, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that process started earlier. And it's weird because I was kind of informally on a sort of nibbly track. There wasn't like a formal program of nibbly studies, but I think people knew that I was interested in nibbly. I'd done well in his courses, and I was doing well in my studies at BYU on the ancient world. And so I remember one time I went to a meeting of the SBL, the Society for Biblical Literature, and I had some of the big names in Mormon apologetics welcoming me into the room of their little party. And one of them, and I won't name names because I don't want to embarrass them now with my disreputable my disreputable ways, but one of them said to me, it's Kish. He wouldn't have called me Kish. He goes, it's Kish, the golden child. And I was like, whoa, I didn't.
The chosen
Very
one.
nice. Very nice. I mean, these guys, I don't agree with them on many things, or there are certain really strong disagreements I have with them, but they were very nice to me. Obviously, I've gone on a much different path, but at the time, I sort of felt like, number one, there was my professor, my mentor at BYU had a plan to rehire me or to hire me at BYU
Upon
when I
graduation.
was done with my PhD program. And he had done it before with others there. But I think that got derailed because, unbeknownst to me, he kind of started a little cult group on campus and ended up being forced into retirement when this blew up in his face and everybody found out that he was up to interesting religious and even social shenanigans, like engaging in an emotional affair with a woman that he had met at like Education Week. So there was somewhat of a suppressed or
You got a little Chad Daybell on you on the university?
I mean, I actually do
own
think
belief system.
I think that there was an element of that. I think he did kind of feed into this wave of like Chad Daybell and Denver Snuffer. In fact, he became a friend of Denver Snuffer's, which kind of shocked me. When I signed his obituary page, his memorial page, my signature was right there with Denver Snuffer's. Because I did owe him a lot, but when I got back when I got to the point where I was applying for a job, I would say admittedly, I didn't really distinguish myself in my application, in my on-campus interview, but he also, I think he grew cool toward me over the course of the process, because at a lunch before we formally began the on-campus interview, he started asking me questions about the Book of Abraham, and I wasn't answering the questions to his satisfaction because he had a real commitment to this position that Nibley had once voiced, because he practically worshipped Nibley, and he viewed Nibley as a prophet, and that was part of the sort of little cult that he was bringing together. Yeah. He had been a research assistant of Nibley himself in his earlier days.
Well, Nibley during his time, and I don't think a lot of people realize that, was so pragmatic, so smart, where the other leaders of the church, like the 12, they were kind of, just pulpit, like standoffish, give the usual message in a very vanilla way.
Yeah.
And Nibley, his approach to any subject was very passionate. He was very great orator. Is that the right word? Like so I could see how people would worship the intellectual charisma of Nibley on a level that would compete with a prophet for sure.
Yeah, well, and he was borderline subversive, honestly. Now, I remember, my spouse, her father, when he was younger, started to get into, fundamentalist teachings because he was reading the Journal of Discourses, et cetera, et cetera. his mother was pretty well connected in the church, and she called Nibley, and she said, I don't know what to do, Professor Nibley. My son, he's getting into these fundamentalist teachings, and he's starting to say that he thinks Adam is God, and Nibley just shot back, well, don't bother him about it. It's true.
She was like, that's not what I called you here. Oh no.
That's and I asked him about it once, before I even knew my spouse and her family. I went up to him because I had some of the same questions, and he just gave me some cryptic answer out of Kabbalah about Adam Kadmon, and at the time I was so confused at what I was hearing. I was just like, okay, I have no idea what you're talking about. But he wasn't at all disavowing or rejecting the idea that Adam was God. He played that kind of stuff close to the vest.
That's fascinating, because he definitely grew up in an era where Adam God doctrine was still a thing in the church. So I can see how he embraced that as truth. So,
yeah, and he's a big fan of Brigham Young. He was a big defender of Brigham Young. Yeah, one of the parts about his profile that I don't identify very much with, because I really don't like Brigham Young at all. But yeah, he was a fan of Brigham Young. He also, I remember another formative experience on BYU campus. I was with the Niblites. Okay, we had all these students of antiquity who would hang out in his non-circulating library called the Ancient Studies Library, and we would sit there and wait for a peek of a sighting of Nibley while we worked on our Hebrew or Latin or whatever. And he was supposed to give like a passing of the torch speech when Wilford Griggs, whom my father actually knew when he was an undergrad, but Wilford Griggs was supposed to take over Ancient Studies, and Nibley was going to go into retirement. So we go to the Fine Arts Building, the Harris Fine Arts Building, to listen to this talk. And we're as we're listening to this guy, our minds are blown, because he's talking about the recent changes in the early 90s to the temple endowment.
Oh.
And we were thought like, well, what's going on here? What is this guy talking about? But of course he did it in his usual way, and we were such big fans of his, we were just lapping this up. But it became clear, I think, individually to each of us as we were sitting there listening to it, that he was identifying the changes to the temple as a sign of apostasy. As a sign of apostasy.
Mm-hmm.
And
I could see that being up his alley. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure.
And but what he was doing was he was blaming the members. He said that the members have rejected truth, and so it's being taken away from them. But I get out of there and I'm looking around at my fellow little Nibley acolytes, and we're in complete shock that anything like that could have even been spoken. But here's the thing. Nibley was wonderful at saying things in such a subtle way that 90% of the people had no clue what he was talking about. And that's how he got away with a lot of this. He was,
I was surprised if you look back and listen to some of his old speeches or lectures or talks, how much he did get away with. Like, where you're kind of like, ooh. I mean, I didn't become a fan of Nibley until I was in my 40s, so I kind of
You have to have the spirit of Nibley to understand what he was saying.
He'd have a heart attack if he saw the today's temple endowment changes. Oh my goodness.
Oh, I know. In fact, I have a heart attack. I mean, I used to joke about, the McTemple of the future, where you go through a drive-through window and get your signs and tokens. And
so
that's
you take out your endowment.
Joke.
You take out your endowment, you get fries and a shake with that.
It's like a Happy Meal, Gene. It's like a Happy Meal. You just get the whole package right there in a little box. And there's a
Yeah.
toy, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was, that was a part of my process of moving away from the LDS Church because, when I had gone through the temple initially to take out my endowment, I have to admit, and I'm not necessarily proud of this, but it is true that I found that at that point in my life to be the single most transformative experience that I'd had as a member of the church. That I really felt deeply spiritually impacted by the endowment. I think that's because I had genuinely been converted, had a testimony of the Book of Mormon. I was in the sort of fasting, repenting mode and was taking all of this very seriously. And then I go to the temple. And so it was really the first church ritual that I'd gone through with this kind of almost adult focus and earnestness and devotion. And so when I got out of there, I was like, boom, I felt like a completely transformed person. And so when I get back from my mission and I find that the endowment has changed, I start thinking, what? What the heck is going on here? And as over the years, as they've chipped away at it more and more, I'm just like, yeah, it's
Especially
just,
when we were taught that it's unchanging, like
yeah,
I grew up with the dogma that this is the unchanging gospel. This is the restored truth. It is
yeah,
here from
yeah,
this point forward into the millennium. Yeah. So to see
yeah,
it change so drastically, it's kind of like heartbreaking in a way,
yeah,
because that tradition or that belief is toast. Even I think if
right,
I were a true believing member, I would struggle with
yeah.
those kind of changes.
I mean, I really
So
feel like, and it's not nice of me to say this, but I feel like the leaders of the church are like business vulgarians. They're just kind of doing things for the sake of efficiency or marketing, and they would rather bring more tithe payers to the table than actually really concern themselves with doing the things that would enliven, enrich, and educate the members of the church. And I know that's not
they've,
completely fair, but
It's like
well, I would say they've
Madison
gone
Avenue
gain
Mormonism.
capital. Like they've gone and stripped all the good things for profit, like literally for gain. And I hate to use the Mitt Romney like equivalent like mindset, but it is. They've taken out any of the fun programs. They've,
yeah,
anything that was enriching. I mean, I hate to say they ruined Boy Scouts, but I love Boy Scouts. My kids are in Boy Scouts in St. Louis, and I think that's such a beautiful like
yeah,
developmental life skill kind of thing.
yeah,
So it's very true. There's
yeah. No, it's
there's no
it's
joy.
it's lawyers and corporate types, and these were
Yep.
actually the people that Nibley inveighed against. These were
Right.
the people that he was openly
Beware of the
criticizing.
managers.
Yeah,
That's right. That's right.
no, he saw it. I think he understood it very well. In that sense, I would have to agree that Nibley was a kind of prophet and one who was decrying, the sort of callous, uh, materialistic
Methodology. Yeah.
way of looking at the world, and because that's what a lot of these folks, for better or worse, they represent. Now, I think it's important that the church, the LDS Church function and be able to pay its bills and et cetera, et cetera. But I kind of have to wonder, with all of the different compromises that are made, what exactly are they left protecting here?
That's right.
Yeah,
It's Mormonism by market analysis.
yeah, kind of. I think that
Well, it seems
that's
like
yeah,
Hinckley, I mean, you think if you go back 30 years where they started the shell companies and hiding that stock portfolio, because that
yeah,
wasn't just like a new thing. That portfolio had been hidden for decades. And
yeah,
if you look back at when that got hidden, you start seeing that also some of the programs changing, like instead of having like women's, like what they used to call it, Relief Society nights, enrichment.
Yeah.
Homemaking.
Like they took
Enrichment.
homemaking became enrichment, but I remember homemaking being so much fun, you know, or
Yeah.
road shows or
road
talent
shows.
shows or just any, like all those programs, that the sports, and it seems like all of that started getting stripped away because it was a money-making thing. Even paying janitors to clean the churches, which gave someone a job. Like,
I know.
gone.
Instead having the members do it. Yeah.
Oh,
So as much as people love Hinckley, I think Hinckley was the catalyst to really changing
Huh. I mean,
the
that
church.
might
could
have been
be. Yeah.
business link to the modern managing Mormons leadership.
I mean, I think that my tendency is, I feel like I'm an amateur critic of my own culture, but in some ways, the problems with Mormonism are the problems of Americanism, certain aspects of Americanism, and it kind of tracks with, look, the vulgarization of our public life today. And I'm not talking about this in the sense of, oh well, those kids looking at TikTok or anything like that, but look at the de-evolution and implosion of our public discourse. I remember that the man who spoke at my graduation, the US senator who spoke at my graduation, had written a book on the history of the Roman Senate. I mean, these days, yeah, right. Imagine that happening. No. You're lucky that they're not getting, having sexual interludes at a theater, these people in Congress these days. I'm talking specifically.
Well, there
of
was that
Lauren
whole
Boebert.
scandal at the VA where they were having orgies in the VA hospital. So I want, you never know.
Yeah.
And
I don't
there was
know.
also that guy who was filming a little gay, I mean, he was whatever, sex with his boyfriend in the.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Okay. I didn't know that. Yeah. No, that's wow. I mean, it's just it's ludicrous, but I think the dumbing down of discourse generally, the decline of literacy. I was never a huge fan of Al Gore because I always thought he was sort of like an overbearing school teacher, and he brought up bad memories of my K through 12 life as a kid. But after he lost the 2000 election, he wrote a book about what he saw as the threats to our global future and to democracy. And one of the things that I think he nailed was, the threat of a culture entirely devoted to the visual, to video, to TV, to computers, because democracy is really sustained by literacy. You think differently when you think through problems in reading. You have more of a sustained focus. You're able to follow more complex arguments. And honestly, people just don't do that these days. I think our current political situation is as much a result of people in America, American citizens, being first and foremost consumers. And this brings me back to the church, because I think its decision-making process and how to function as a church is often working on that same wavelength. It's how the members of the church are, in a sense, the consumers. And if they don't like going to the temple because it's too long, okay, we'll chop some of it off. If people don't like Mormons because they're weird and they think we're not Christians, we'll just show a big picture of Jesus at the beginning of the endowment. Yeah, we're Christians. You see that Christus symbol that we just plastered everywhere? Now I drive by one of the ward buildings in my current hometown, and there's this cheesy looking Christus poster that's draped over the church sign on the side of the road. I'm just like, I'm sorry, guys, but this is it's just tacky. It's tacky. It's
Agreed.
vulgar, and I don't think it really brings nourishing spiritual health to that community to be focused on those kinds of matters too much,
Yeah.
which I think is true.
That's right. And
Well, you can see it going into any kind of church service. Like, people are bored stiff. They're on their phones just scrolling, waiting for the time to pass. It's not engaging anymore. It's just like,
that's right. There's a movie that takes that to the extreme called Idiocracy, where
oh
the
yeah,
visual,
it's a good one.
I feel like we're living in that movie right now.
We are.
It's true.
We are. Yeah.
And so actually,
Kish
Kuman appeared on Mormonism Live on October 16th, 2024. And we'll refer people to that episode in which he talks more about his, we'll say, professorial experiences and how he got engaged in apologetics and how he was critical of the way apologetics were happening, and sort of became Kish Kuman even more so. And
didn't put up with bullying apologists online.
But had it taken you then, that was maybe 20 years ago?
Almost. It's really about 2006, 2007. So it slightly preceded the Prop 8 stuff. But those things happened in pretty quick succession. So, I applied for a job at BYU. I got my job where I am now. I jumped onto this board that was called Mormon Discussions Board, and became Kish Kuman, and then Prop 8, and I stopped going to church.
Right. And you were kicking against the pricks of apologetics, we'll say. But lo and behold, 18 years later or so, 16, 18 years later, you start a podcast called Coffee with Kish.
Yeah.
And what inspired you to start that podcast?
Well, it's Coffee with Kish because I think my in the pendulum swing of my life, I feel like I've sort of swung back a little bit toward the center, but that was, I think it was really always part of my personality, even when I was Kish Kuman, that I felt like being fair. And I didn't like people to be nasty, which also meant that I didn't really dig people being nasty toward the apologists. Like, a lot of people don't like Daniel C. Peterson. He's sort of a lightning rod for negative attention from critics of the church. And I can totally see why that's the case. And I've had lots of run-ins from him. I could show you, if I did a little search through my Google email, my Gmail, I could show you all of my Daniel Peterson emails where he's not happy about something that I said on Mormon Discussions Board. And I think he would actually write me, though, because he thought that I wasn't completely crackers. I mean, he disagreed with me on so many things, but he thought that out of a bunch of bad apples, maybe I wasn't quite as rotten in some ways as the others.
The other critics of him.
Yeah, the other critics of him, but because MDB became like this entire running LARPing project where we were pretending to be like the anti-BYU. It was called Cassius University. And we even had a fake journal, the Electronic Journal of Jaredite Studies, which is a joke that I came up with because I thought, what kind of obscure Mormon topic could we pretend to have a journal of? And I thought Jaredite Studies would be an obvious choice.
Perfect.
But it was a really lively and fun community, but the apologists really didn't like it. And over the years, at points in time, I felt like I was threatened by some apologists, not physically threatened or anything, but people hinted at the possibility of contacting my bosses at work to get me in trouble. I remember one of my favorites was Lou Midgley, who said that maybe someone should contact my dean because here's this assistant professor who hasn't gotten tenure yet, who's spending too much time online as an anti-Mormon. And I said to him, well, Lou, I think I'm doing well. I've managed to publish things outside of a 50-mile radius, which was my cut against him because a lot of his stuff had been published in Utah. It wasn't very nice of me to say, because Lou Midgley is, anyone can not like him, but he's a learned fellow, and a lot of these guys are very intelligent. But I think they're also quirky, and some of their personality quirks contribute to their kind of bullying, belittling behavior that they have engaged in over the years to attack critics of the LDS Church, or even liberal members of the LDS Church, which they also have a history of going after.
Right.
They
so
definitely preach from the bully pulpit sometimes.
Yeah. That's right. I wish I'd come up with
different
that.
meaning.
Darn it.
You can have it.
You're too good, Debbie. Too good.
So you decided
Use that
to
anytime.
do Coffee with Kish as a way of being sort of a moderate voice.
No, well, I wanted to just, because I'm really tired of the sort of back and forth of, oh, the church is awful, oh, the church is perfect. And in my mind, Mormonism is just really wild. I mean, it's almost like how you can't even believe that this thing exists in a way. When you're on the inside, you're just like, oh yeah, this is my culture, this is how I grew up. But even, the founding story itself sounds like something that, Disney should have made a movie about. If it weren't such a fraught topic, it's just so weird, that this farm boy finds these gold plates written in Egyptian, and you can imagine like in the Witnesses movie, the dramatization of people chasing after him, trying to get the plates from him, and everything. It's dramatic. It's interesting, but Mormonism in general just has so many amazingly strange, interesting, and exotic facets to it that I think interest in it is fully justified.
Truth is stranger than fiction, but in a way, there's a lot of this fiction is stranger than fiction when Joseph Smith's involved and the retelling of history.
Well, it's almost like if Lord of the Rings became a religion, like it's a great story. Yeah. It's a great movie. People are big fans of it, but it didn't become like a powerhouse religion owning, a massive stock portfolio. And, they do. They really.
Yeah.
If only J.R.R. Tolkien had a vision.
Well, here's the thing, though. I mean, I think that that Lord of the Rings has, in an interesting way, brought a kind of conservative religious viewpoint into focus in the world. I mean, a lot of the people on the right these days, there's a number of the influential ones, a lot of the influential ones, have really been big Tolkien fans, because his undergirding religious point of view, his underlying religious perspective, was very much of a conservative Christian. I mean, it's romanticizing the ideal monarch.
Yeah.
And that's
it's
not
definitely the battle of good versus evil, which is bread and butter for Christians.
So I think it has had a more interesting, subtle, but no less profound impact. It's certainly Tolkien's works are much better works than the Book of Mormon. Sorry to say that. I actually like the Book of Mormon a lot. It's a way better read, certainly, but I mean, I actually quite like the Book of Mormon. I don't like people who get nasty about how stupid the Book of Mormon is. I hate it when I love John DeLynn, but I hate it when he calls it biblical fanfic, because to me, it's just such a silly idea that books in the Bible are fanfic of earlier books in the Bible. So you might say it's all fanfic. So why bag on the Book of Mormon in particular as though it's so unique, when you have a lot of other books that were written in antiquity that people created and put other people's names on? The Book of Mormon doesn't stand out as a particularly bad or egregious example of this type of thing. I think it fits. It fits Christian religious culture rather well.
That's right. And so what's it called when you assign some important name to your work in order to get more attention to it? Like if I were to write something and say it's discovered, it's really Plato's writings.
It's pseudepigraphy. Yeah.
Pseudepigrapha, right?
Yeah. Well, right. In plural, it's pseudepigrapha. In singular, I think it's pseudepigraphon, but nobody really uses that.
So in a way, Joseph Smith created a whole bunch of prophets that created authority, as Dan Vogel would say, over people by having pseudepigrapha throughout the book.
Yeah, but I think in my perspective, because I take Joseph Smith seriously. I don't believe in deriding Joseph Smith. I don't have to agree with Joseph Smith. I don't have to boost Joseph Smith and try to convince people to join Mormonism, because that's not what I do. But in my mind, the only authority that really exists under Mormonism is one's belief in the validity of his prophetic calling. And the rest of it is kind of just window dressing. But I think that cuts in both ways. If you don't think he's a prophet, then why on earth would you waste your time with any of it? If you do think he's a prophet, why do you need all of these other props to validate your position that Joseph Smith was a prophet? And one of the things that annoys me about apologetics is that it seeks for all of these other props that kind of reveal an underlying insecurity about the prophetic calling of Joseph Smith.
Right. But you look at Joseph Smith as a philosopher, theologian.
I think he's a prophet. But again, that doesn't mean that I'm taking the church's position. I think I take him seriously as a prophet. It's like I don't follow Islam, but I can say that Muhammad was a prophet, and Joseph Smith is in many ways in the mode of Muhammad as a prophet, as he was himself aware that he was kind of cutting a similar path.
And some people take Emerson and Thoreau as prophets as well, but as they can get enriched ideas and deep thoughts from people like that. So
the Transcendentalists were some of the most important and profound religious thinkers of their time, and they, for example, I've heard it said, and I completely agree, that Emerson, for example, is the greatest Platonic spiritual thinker of American history. He is a Platonist, and people just don't understand that, because their encounter with Emerson's work is only on a certain level or from a certain perspective. And he's a very profound religious thinker. I think everyone. One of the things that really annoys me about us as a culture is that we really don't take religion seriously, and so the religion that people end up glomming onto is, like fast food religion,
a caricature.
It's and to our harm. I mean, the people who are destroying our world right now they've been poorly served by their religions. And they've been poorly served by these religions because you have flim flam artists who hide behind pastoral robes, who are making a lot of money off of teaching people absolute garbage. infantile garbage. So it really gets under my skin. But that's also, I mean, with Coffee with Kish, what I'm trying to do in a very humble way is just sort of be playful and say, okay, this is interesting stuff. But at the same time, I don't want it to be a college lecture. I want it to be fun. And so I just want to say, hey, did you think about this? Or did you know about this topic? And to try to bring in a fun and playful way more of Mormonism to people's awareness as just something that's groovy Americana, right? This is great groovy Americana.
So you're trying to do cognitive therapy instead of dogma.
Yeah, well, I think cognitive therapy is a lot more needed than dogma, that's for sure. I don't know that I would have such lofty pretensions, but yeah, I would think that cognitive therapy is much more needed than dogma.
Yeah. So we invite all our listeners to head over to Coffee with Kish. We'll have a link in the description. And
Thank you
there's
so much.
so much more we could probably talk for hours more, but we will set some of those things aside for future topics, I hope, if you're willing to come on.
Oh, I always thank you.
We could even do something tangential to Smithmas, if you're up for it.
Smithmas. I'm going to be doing Smithmas at Coffee with Kish, definitely. But I think the more people
I've never heard of
doing
this thing. What is this?
We're celebrating the feast
December 23rd.
of the birth of Joseph Smith.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Okay.
I mean, we may even have Johnny cakes, which was one of his favorite foods. So.
That's true.
Okay. Do a little stick wrestling demonstration.
Yeah. No, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll light a candle underneath an icon of Saint Joseph. He's a saint.
Just
right?
Don't do anything in the barn, okay? Just none of that. Just kidding.
No. There will be no barns making appearances. It'll be family friendly, Smithmas.
There we go.
That's right, and it'll be the day before Mormonism Lives, or rather, Radio Free Mormon will do his Christmas Eve special.
I know.
For all the people who have spent lonely nights on some Christmas Eves because family situations happen.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad they're doing that. I wish I could participate, but my family situation may become lonelier if I spend it with RFM instead of my wife and kids.
That's right. Yeah, I'm probably not big enough to be invited on his show yet, but maybe in a couple of years.
I see it in your future.
That's
I
right.
prophesy.
Oh, there we go.
Thanks everybody for watching. Have a great rest of the year. Have a great Smithmas and Christmas and all those good things. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.